Riddles are fascinating word puzzles, ancient word puzzles, in fact. For example, what is the difference between the jeweler and the jailer? Well, the jeweler sells watches, and the jailer watches sells. The riddle presents an enigma that has a witty solution to it. And canons are a lot like riddles in that way because they present a complex problem for both the composer and the performer. So today we're going to study canons and learn about their related musical devices, as well as learn about the Love is Love is Love canon by Abby Patinas, and hopefully become inspired to compose original canons. Let's get started. When we read the Oxford Dictionary of Music definition of canon, we come to find some very curious language that reads a lot like the rules to Monopoly, a device in counterpoint whereby a melody in one voice or part is imitated throughout note by note or by one or more voices, which is normally begin after the first voice and overlap it. Okay, if we had to compose a composition based on that definition, it's unlikely that it would get composed. Instead, we can study an example. Two other important definitions here: the common body of knowledge, or define principles of a definition for measurement, or in Greek, a unit of measurement, a rod. Now this is really important because when it comes to canons, measurement is key, both on the vertical axis, in other words in harmony, and on the horizontal axis, in terms of rhythm. Then there is the music theory elephant in the room, counterpoint versus polyphony. Polyphony could be understood as a style of music that flourished in the Renaissance with composers such as Palestrina, but it also is defined as a texture type, whereas all voices are of equal merit or value, versus counterpoint, which is both a discipline within music theory, but it is also a way that we can measure vertical and horizontal manifestations of operations in music. And that's going to be key for analyzing Love is Love is Love. Imitative music styles are oftentimes called these various terms here: the rota or round, the caccia or the catch, the fuga, okay, or the strict canon. In this case, a round is very different from a canon, and we're going to figure out why that is. Imitated devices associated with canons, and in the terms of fugues, we also find these terms. Augmentation, to make rhythm values larger; diminution, to make rhythm values smaller; inversion, to flip intervals; and retrograde, to play quite literally backwards. And then there's a curious imitation cancresans, or the crab canon, or sometimes called the mirror canon, whereas the piece of music can be played backwards and forwards simultaneously with pleasing effect. Invertible counterpoint is a very tricky concept to understand, but if you can just simply think about this as being able to superimpose melodies on top of one another without ill effect. And with Love is Love is Love, we see a very interesting approach to invertible counterpoint. You can see the mantra in the first system as what might be understood as the alto, and then the first iteration of the melodic line imposed as perhaps a soprano. And then in the second system, you can see the same alto voice, but then now perhaps a tenor or a bass voice is representing the first iteration of the melody. And the intervals, the Arabic numerals, show us that all of the intervals that line up point against point as vertical effect are all consonances. Perhaps one of the earliest examples of a canon is the 13th century rota Sumerze Kummenin. And this is very similar to Abby's piece in that it features this mantra, which is a repetitive component that happens throughout while the other voices imitate above the mantra, and this one is in 4 parts. Let's take a listen to the clip. The height of canon as a genre perhaps could be described as the achievement, the musical offering by J.S. Bach, BWV 1079. This was one of the last pieces he wrote based on a royal theme. And you can see the collection here is a collection specifically of canons, including crab canons, or canons that can be performed backwards and forwards, and also this very curious Currendo Invenientis. And let's take a look at that one. You can see here that this specific canon is only one line of music, but there are 2 clefs, one of them upside down and the other one is the alto clef. Well, this can be performed in its right side up version or its inverted version. And so the translation of this title means "seek and ye shall find," which is up to the performer to try to figure out just exactly how to put this together. Very curious puzzle. Of course, Mozart was interested in puzzles, and here you see also the reversed clefs. This is the table music, and so the idea here is you put the score on the table, and one violinist is facing the other, and one plays forwards, the other plays backwards, and this is an excellent example of one performer playing forwards and the other performer playing in retrograde. I decided to include this concept in this conversation because I really do think that Abby's piece does resemble kind of a quadlibet, or a mashup. Remember the video viral mashups that appeared on YouTube when YouTube became a thing? Well, these happen to be popular going all the way back to the 14th century, and the idea here is that you overlay numerous tunes, and that's amusing and kind of fun and exciting. And in the Renaissance period, they actually took tunes that were sacred and married them up with popular tunes, which was sort of risque, but again, it's all about interesting ways to create puzzles in music. So if you want to create a quadlibet, or a bunch of tunes that can be performed simultaneously, you got to find tunes that match in terms of their harmony, first of all, and also their meter and probably their tempo, so that you can have these congruent melodies that are distinct enough differently, and have them all moving simultaneously. Now, what Abby does is she uses this mantra, which is kind of like what a music theory would, a student would understand as a cantus firmus, or a melody that is required, and that melody then allows for other melodies to be generated based on what is possible according to the cantus firmus. When we look at the cantus firmus, or this mantra, it really sounds like "Love, Love, Love" by the Beatles' Yellow Submarine, if you remember the tune. And we'd have to ask Abby if that was her intention, but either way, upon further examination, we discover that it's a 4-bar unit of music that breaks into 2 couplets, and the 2 couplets are related by what we call in music theory a sequence, okay, or repetitive material at different pitch levels. However, her sequence is interesting upon further examination. When we look at the sequence, they're not exact, the 2 couplets. As a matter of fact, the second sequence has a modification to it, and so therefore it's called a modified sequence. In other words, the same shape, but not exact. If I recompose her sequence and I create what is called tonal sequence, or 2 segments of a sequence with the exact same shape, I come up with something that looks like this. Now, arrow 1 and arrow 2 are congruent. However, when I overlay that tonal sequence with her melodic iteration, of the first unit of musical material, I discover that some strange dissonances appear at arrow 1 and arrow 2. I discover a second and a tritone which are not handled quite favorably in terms of their counterpoint. Typically, we don't like to leap away from dissonances, and in this case, we would have to leap away from that major second. And it's even uglier if it's in invertible counterpoint. So the counterpoint is compromised as a result of writing this as a tonal sequence. So she may have chosen to write this as a modified sequence to avoid this compromised counterpoint. The other thing we notice is that she chose to base the mantra around this harmonic motive that is the famous Pachelbel canon. I don't think we need to listen to it again at this point, but it's a cyclical progression of chords that we can understand in music theory terms as a harmonic motive. In other words, there's a pattern in the chords. The roots lie a fourth apart, okay, descending fourths apart. And as we cycle through the progression, we can hear this pattern. And then at the end of the pattern, we have what is called the turnaround. In other words, two chords that function as a unit together to bring us back to the tonic. In this case, E minor 7 and A function as 2 and 5, or a supertonic and a dominant, A being the dominant, and the dominant leads us back to the tonic, and that allows us to continue this progression over and over again as many times as we would like. So therefore, the series of chords is cyclical. We can continue this process, which is a popular, many popular music tunes have cyclical progressions that just simply repeat over and over again, and very easy to work with. I also decided I would look at dissonance within the work, and I noticed that when I took the mantra and I began to overlay that with the different melodic components, I discovered two very interesting decisions made by our composer. The second iteration of melodic material, when overlaid with the mantra, produces dissonances of fourths and seconds, and I found it very interesting, the choice to use syncopation to perhaps draw out some of that dissonance for dramatic effect. I also noticed that with inclusion of the fourth iteration of melodic material, when that is married up with the mantra and superimposed above the Latin text, at arrow number 1 we can see a suspension, which perhaps is some kind of text painting or use of musical medium to draw out some dramatic effect within the interesting decision to deviate from love, love, love to the Uber Usialis language. Then finally, how do we end the piece? Well, it says last time, all groups in unison to reinforce the message in unity. Love, love, love. All we need is love. Love, love. All we need is love. And this is, of course, overlaid with the cyclical progression, which is included above the score. And there's a ritenuto and then slower as kind of an outro. And I'd like to bring to your attention that at that slower moment, the dominant, which is A, is the chord in effect which leads to D, and that creates a sense of finality and a sense of drive towards the end. We call that, in music theory, we call that circle progression. When the roots lie a fifth or a fourth apart, we can see that these chords have a very potent and powerful drive to get to their tonic. Finally, I hope you are interested enough in composing your own canons. Think vertically, horizontally. Always measure vertically. if your intervals are in agreement, thirds, sixths, octaves, fifths, you'll produce a favorable canon. Watch out for too many parallel fifths, or too many repeated intervals, of course, too many parallel octaves. And I hope that you enjoy this experience with this new piece of music by Abby Bettinas. Always compose canons responsibly. Good luck. I hope you enjoyed this video.